If you have your Bibles, please turn to Romans chapter 12, please. Romans chapter 12, verse 1. Romans chapter 12, verse 1. The Apostle Paul writes, "Therefore I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice, acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, so that you may prove what the will of God is, that which is good and acceptable and perfect." Last week, I ran across a little story, and this story's not from me. I'm taking it from someone else. But this story touched my heart, and it goes like this. The preacher was going down the road one day, and he saw a little boy beside the road. And the little boy was kind of disheveled and did not have clean clothing and was really struggling. And he noticed the little boy had been digging in the trash for something to eat. Well, the preacher stopped and asked the little boy if he was hungry, and the little boy said yes. And he says, "Well, where's your parents?" And he said, "Well, they're gone right now. And I've come down here to get me and my brother something to eat out of the trash." And the preacher says, "Well, let me get your brother and you some food." And he went and got the children some food. And these were young children. And he took the little boy home, and the little brother was there at the house. And they were just all excited because they had something to eat. It seems like the parents would leave on the weekend and leave the older brother in charge of the little brother and wouldn't leave anything for him to eat. So the preacher asked the little boy, says, "Would you like to go to church?" The little boy says, "I've never been to church." He says, "Well, would you like to go?" He says, "Yeah, I think I might like to go to church." So the preacher talked with the two little boys for a little while and told them, says, "I'll be back here tomorrow and pick you up and we'll go to church." So the preacher gets there on Sunday morning and goes up and knocks on the door, and the little boys are still in bed. So he helps them get up, and he had some things for them, and he picks them up and he takes them to church. And they're sitting in worship, and it comes along that the little boy was enthralled, the oldest one especially, with what was going on around him, because he had never been to church before, but he had heard some things. The time came in the service that they were passing around the giving, the plate for giving. And as it come down the pew, the oldest little boy, he was perplexed, for a better word, because he had nothing to put in to give back to God. He had got something to eat the day before. He'd got some things from the preacher that morning, but he had nothing to give back to God. And the plate come to him, and he held it in his hands, and he looked at it. And he was ashamed. He had nothing to give to God. And finally, someone said, "But just pass it on." And he did, but he sat there and he thought about it. And he thought about it. And he thought about it. I don't have anything to give God. Well, he kind of was at the end of the giving. The little boy jumps up out of his seat and he runs to the back of the auditorium. And he tells one of the guys, wait just a minute. And the man says, "Well, what is it?" He says, "Please, put the plate on the floor. I have something to give God." And the man put the plate on the floor, and the little boy just stood in it. He just stepped over in and he stood there. He says, I'm giving God me. Folks, we can learn a lot from that story. Therefore, I urge you, brethren, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies a living and holy sacrifice acceptable to God, which is your spiritual service of worship. Let us be those, like the little boy. Learn that we need to give everything we are, everything we have, to God, because it belongs to Him anyway. If there is a need on your heart, please let that need be made known. Come now, as together we stand and as we sing.